This is Kurtop with you, and these are 100 archaeological excavations that changed our understanding of history. The vanished branch of humans. On a high plateau near Bogota, human remains about 6,000 years old were found. Ancient DNA was carefully extracted from the teeth and dense bones purified from impurities and compared with large databases. There was no match with modern peoples. The genetic fingerprint stands apart. This means that an independent group of hunter-gatherers lived in those places, which eventually disappeared from today's picture, either blending in without a noticeable trace or dying out. Small groups are vulnerable to any changes. The climate and prey change, neighbors arrive, diseases or migration begin. Over a few centuries, the original picture is easily lost. In such cases, ancient bones preserve the trace, but among the living descendants, it is no longer visible. It's important to stick to the facts. This is not about another race or a sensation for the headlines. The point is that the flow of migrations took different routes and had different outcomes. To understand the fate of this lineage more precisely, new samples from the same layers in neighboring areas are needed. Perhaps further in time, distant kinship will be discovered. One thing is clear today: not every human branch has survived to the present day. Here, it was possible to see traces of people who no longer exist as a separate group, the fossils of the dragon man. Scientists in China reported that they discovered a new species of human, which they called Homo longi, or translated as dragon man. The skull of this man was discovered back in 1933, but during the Japanese occupation of China, it was hidden in a well, where it remained for 85 years, until it ended up in the hands of scientists. They studied it and concluded that it belongs to a new species of humans. The skull is quite large, and research shows that Dragon Man may be a close relative of Homo sapiens. It is unclear when exactly Dragon Man appeared and when he became extinct, but as scientists have determined, the skull itself dates to about 309,000 to 938,000 years ago. However, scientists are not completely sure that the Dragon Man skull belongs to a new species. According to one theory, the scientists may have found the skull of a Denisovan hominid, which is still poorly studied due to the small number of fossils discovered. The New Testament stained with urine. Another religious artifact from Italy is an incomplete Bible known as the Purple Codex of Rossano. The manuscript contains only the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. The 1,500-year-old book is one of the oldest newly discovered manuscripts and has long puzzled scholars with the purple color of its pages. In those days, dyes were very difficult to make. It was originally assumed that the parchment was treated with a substance produced by sea slugs of the Murex genus. In 2016, during X-ray fluorescence analysis, scientists were unable to detect bromine on the pages, even though it should be present in substances obtained from the slugs. As a result, it turned out that the manuscript was treated with orkin, a natural dye obtained from lichens, as well as fermented urine. The processing required ammonia, and at that time there was no other source of ammonia except urine, an ancient statue of the goddess. In Croatia, archaeologists unearthed a damaged statue, presumably of the goddess Venus, dating back to the 2nd century. It was brought to the Homeland Museum in Beograd, where the statue of the Roman nude girl, discovered in Zadar, will be preserved and studied in detail. So the statue is quite large, about 180 centimeters tall, but only a part of the statue from the knees to the waist has been preserved. The pose of the girl resembles the headless and armless statue of Venus Victrix Ceroti, which is kept in the Archaeological Museum of Split. The statue of Venus, discovered in the 18th century in the palace of Emperor Diocletian in Salona, also has the right knee bent and the legs slightly extended forward. Zadar, where part of the statue of the naked girl was found, was a prosperous city during the Roman Empire. It was discovered in the ruins of a local luxurious villa. Researchers believe that one of the wealthy residents of the city could have lived in this house. It is possible that this statue decorated the villa's atrium. Archaeologists discovered that the floor of the house was made of marble, approximately 260 square meters in area. The walls of the villa were also made of gray marble. 10 days without sleep. In the 1960s, a 17-year-old student, Randy Gardner, decided to test how long a person could go without sleep. At first, it was a project for a school science fair, and then sleep specialists got involved. He was constantly kept active and under observation. Conversations, night walks, board games, basketball, paintball, simple tests for memory and attention. The first 2 days showed the classic symptoms: yawning, irritability, difficulty focusing. By the third day, his speech and coordination started to deteriorate, and it became harder to express simple thoughts. On the fourth and fifth days, he began to experience sensory distortions. Shadows became figures. Text seemed to float away, and he thought he heard things that weren't real. His reactions slowed, his memory faltered, and he forgot recent actions. By days 6 to 8, his mood swung. Logic puzzles were very hard, but he managed familiar tasks and still did well in a paintball match, if the movement was automatic. By the 9th to 11th days, he started experiencing microsleeps, brief moments of unconsciousness lasting a few seconds, when his eyes were open, but his brain would momentarily shut down. Counting became hard, words jumbled, and odd ideas surfaced, then vanished instantly. After the experiment, he slept about 14 hours, woke up to eat, then slept again overnight. In a few days, his schedule nearly returned to normal. The doctors did not record any serious consequences at the time, although Gardner himself later recalled that he had problems with sleep. The Guinness Book of Records no longer accepts such records. It's too risky. What does this story show in simple terms? Lack of sleep quickly affects attention, emotions, and self-control. Then microsleeps start to happen, and the brain takes over on its own. It's better to leave records to the textbooks. In everyday life, even one night without sleep makes a person different. An image of the goddess of childbirth in the mountains of Krasnoyarsk Krai. Siberian archaeologists have discovered an image of 2 women in childbirth on the rocks in Krasnoyarsk Krai. The rock painting is attributed to the Okunev cattle breeding culture of the Bronze Age. This dates back to the end of the 3rd to the middle of the 2nd millennium before Christ. Stone drawings of women in childbirth poses have been found on the rocks of Mount Tepsi 3 times already. The last 2 were discovered by staff from the Department of Archaeology at Kemerovo State University. The petroglyphs depict figures of women with bent legs and feet apart. In one image, besides the woman in childbirth, there are also figures of animals. And in the other, archaeologists believe there is a male figure with an erect phallus. Scientists have concluded that the ancient drawings might depict mother goddesses who were revered as part of a fertility cult. By performing a ritual, people could gain the protection of these goddesses. It is possible that the peoples of Central Asia during the Bronze Age had a common mythological system. Historians suggest that there may have been several fertility goddesses who performed different functions similar to what existed in Indian, Greek, Near Eastern, and other mythologies. Tarim mummies. Scientists have managed to fully decode the DNA of the Tarim mummies, which are about 3,800 years old and were discovered in the early 20th century in the northwest of China. As a result of the researchers' work, it was found that genetically, the mummies do not belong to Indo-Europeans, but to a unique isolated group descended from ancient Eurasian hunter-gatherers. According to Professor Chian Chun-won of Seoul University, archaeogeneticists have long been searching for traces of the last populations of ancient northern Eurasians in order to better understand the genetic history of the continent. As a result, one of these groups of ancient people was found in the most unexpected place. These mummies were discovered at the beginning of the last century in the Tarim Basin by the expedition of British traveler Mark Stein and Swedish geographer Sven Hedin. The mummified bodies belonged to ancient farmers who lived in the northwestern region of modern China about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. New technologies allowed researchers to decode the DNA of 18 Tarim mummies, as well as 5 people who presumably lived at the same time on the neighboring Dzungarian plain. Scientists determined that the mummies belonged to a unique population, not related to either Indo-European peoples or to various groups of farmers from East Asia and Mongolia who lived nearby. Genetic analysis indicated a relationship between the mummified remains and ancient hunter-gatherers who lived much farther north, near the shores of Lake Baikal and in the northern Eurasian steppes. Later on, they were assimilated or destroyed by other peoples, and traces of them have survived only among some of the population of southern Siberia and Native Americans of North America. In the course of further research, scientists intend to find out the reasons why contacts between the inhabitants of the Tarim Basin and the populations of neighboring regions of Eurasia left no traces in their genome. What are these terrifying creatures? For a century and a half, a strange creature has been drifting in oceanic plankton, the Y larva. It looks like an ordinary microscopic crustacean, but no one has ever seen its adult form. But scientists have made a sensational conclusion based on the study of genes. By large sets of genes, these creatures are distant relatives of sea barnacles, and most likely parasites. If you add the molting hormone of crustaceans to them, the Y larva suddenly sheds its suit and turns into a tiny slug. This is exactly how parasitic barnacles begin their life inside a host. That's why we've never seen the adult stage of this creature, because it hides inside the body of another animal. The team collected thousands of such larvae, mapped their place on the crustacean family tree, and showed that this is a separate lineage with a vast unexplored diversity. In one Japanese port, they found more than 100 different forms. It seems that their adult stage is a hidden life inside another animal. The larva we see as Y is just a means of transport. The next step is to attach to a host, dissolve into its tissues, and disappear from sight. That's why there are no photos of the adult in textbooks. It had to be searched for not in the water, but inside the prey's body. When this happens, the century-old mystery will finally have a conclusion. Vatican archives. Another purple pigment is damaging scrolls all over the world, but the ancients never added a pigment to books that, over the years, would eat away at the text and destroy the parchment. To get to the root of this problem, researchers studied a damaged book from the Vatican secret archives. This 5-meter-long scroll made of goat skin was a petition written in the year 1244 AD. The notes in the margins have already disappeared under the purple color, and some pages have become completely unreadable. Suspecting the presence of microbes, researchers took samples from the scroll for gene sequencing. Unlike the mysterious culprit in Tutankhamun's tomb, this type of bacteria was identified. But what puzzled the researchers was that these were marine bacteria. After all, the history of the scroll had nothing to do with the ocean, but the damaged manuscripts had one thing in common. They were made from animal skins. This turned out to be the key that helped solve the mystery. The skins were treated with sea salt, which contained marine organisms, including those that produce purple dye. Bacteria began to multiply in the goat skin when the temperature and humidity became suitable for it. Today, the damage done to many manuscripts is irreparable, but researchers continue to hope that one day they will be able to safely remove the remaining pigment. The whole world stands on it. Before nails appeared, houses were assembled like a puzzle. Logs were joined with dovetail joints. Boards were fastened with tenons and grooves. Every joint required time and a precise hand. The nail changed the pace of construction. 1 strike secures a part, 10 strikes assemble a wall. The story began back in ancient Rome. There, people learned to smelt iron on a large scale and cast fasteners, giving them shape instead of carving them from wood. But up until the end of the 18th century, nails in Europe were almost always forged by hand. The blacksmith would heat up a square rod, hammer all 4 sides, draw out the point, cut the head, and then chop off the finished blank. Nails differed in length, profile, and purpose, from thin roofing nails to short boat nails, and each nail cost as much as a small side job. A revolution happened at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. Machines appeared that cut iron strips into blanks and formed the head with a single strike. Nails became cheaper and turned into a mass-produced commodity. They were no longer counted individually, but by the sack. Then came steel made by the Bessemer process, replacing soft wrought iron with a strong uniform material. The nail became a standard part for any builder, and alongside it appeared the screw, for situations where you need a tighter hold and the option to disassemble. It sounds simple, but through the nail, we can observe the development of entire eras. By the shape of the nail head, archaeologists can distinguish a handmade nail from the 17th century from a factory-made one from the 19th century. They can tell from the rust that the roof was repaired long ago, and from the varying wall lengths, they see several generations expanded the house. And yes, the nail did not replace ancient techniques. A good carpenter will still use a dry tenon where the wood needs to move without cracking, and a nail will be used where speed and rigidity are important. The sacred pool of ancient astronomers. Scientists have announced the discovery of a sacred pool of the ancient Phoenicians on the former island city of Motia in western Sicily. This pool was used for religious purposes and for tracking the movement of the stars. Previously, this pool, known as the Kothon, was thought to be a military harbor. Researchers discovered the Kothon in the early 1920s, and the pool itself dates back to between 550 and 397 before Christ. Excavations at this site resumed between 2002 and 2010. During this time, a large building was discovered at the edge of the Kothon, a temple dedicated to the Phoenician deity Baal. Scientists studied these findings for the next 10 years. According to the latest research, the Kothon was not connected to the sea and was filled by natural springs, so it could not have served as an entrance to a hypothetical navigable basin. In addition, archaeologists found burial stones, altars, religious offerings, and a pedestal in the center of the basin at the excavation site. The pedestal still has the feet of a tall statue. According to scientists, it once depicted Baal himself. The location of the basin also suggests that it was aligned with the stars. Ancient astronomers may have used it to track the movement of celestial bodies. What is encrypted on the Phaistos disk? More than a century has passed since one of the most mysterious and fascinating artifacts in history was discovered during the excavations of the city of Fest on Crete. The Phaistos disk is a round clay tablet with both sides inscribed with mysterious, strange symbols. This discovery became one of the most interesting monuments of the history and culture of the ancient Mediterranean. The archaeological artifact became the first known preserved printed text. It was imprinted on clay using miniature stamps 3,000 years before the printing press was invented by Gutenberg. A total of 242 symbols are printed on the Phaistos disk, each consisting of more than 40 different signs. Some of them are unclear. They take the form of familiar objects representing, for example, a boat, a bow, a shield, and a helmet. All the signs are arranged in a spiral and separated into groups by vertical lines, with each group containing from 2 to 7 signs. Scientists believe that these are either individual syllables or whole words. Scientists have not reached a consensus about the origin of the symbols printed on the disk. Despite this, quite a few facts still support the theory of Cretan origin for the script used on the Phaistos disk. This is also shown by the clay's origin used to make the disk. Also, the symbols, or their prototypes, come from local realities. In one of the caves on Crete, archaeologists discovered a copper axe that was the same age as the Phaistos disk. There were peculiar inscriptions on the object. These were symbols from the disk mixed with linear script, which was widely used in Crete during that era. In other words, the language in which the text of the Phaistos disk is printed is Minoan, not Greek. The Phaistos disk is a striking example of technological progress in ancient times, which, for some unknown reason, did not gain any popularity in its own era. The mystery of the artifact's text will most likely never be solved. Only a discovery as significant as the Rosetta Stone could help. The principle of bilingualism was used there. François Champollion was able to decipher the previously unknown Egyptian hieroglyphs thanks to this. Perhaps it was this very principle that was used when printing the text on the Phaistos disk. The first frozen human? In a steel vessel, where the temperature is constantly minus 196 degrees, lies a man who has set science at odds with death. His name is James Kirom Bedford, a professor of psychology, and in January of 1967, he made a choice that sounded like madness to most people. The doctors had literally 7 minutes after his heart stopped to check the protocol. A ventilator supplied oxygen to his brain. His veins were filled with dimethyl sulfoxide instead of blood. His body was placed on dry ice and then transferred to a Dewar vessel with liquid nitrogen. From that moment, his biography turned into an experiment lasting decades, not about immortality, but about a bold challenge to time. Is it possible to stop life, and where does personality end? Bedford's capsule was moved between storage facilities, survived lawsuits from relatives and insurance company pressure. His son hauled it on a trailer, and in the early 90s, Alcor specialists brought the body in for examination. The face looked younger than its 73 years. Some areas of the skin had lost their color, and the corneas had turned white from the ice. But overall, the preservation was better than expected, and Bedford was placed in a new vessel. Today he rests in Scottsdale alongside dozens of cryo patients. The story isn't over yet. Ahead lies only the storage protocol and a long countdown of waiting. Since then, cryobiology has come a long way. Crude freezing has been replaced by vitrification. Dimethyl sulfoxide has been archived, and tissue destruction by ice crystals is now prevented by precise control of cooling and warming. No one promises resurrection tomorrow. And honestly, the most pressing question isn't even about a cure for cancer, but whether neural connections will survive that very long for now. That's what really gets to me. One human life has willingly become an experiment for future generations, so that we can finally answer what death truly is. Is it a switch or a long pause that can be rewound? Genetic disc. A disc was discovered in Colombia, made of a durable material, and its surface shocked all the researchers. It depicted all the stages of human conception and birth. It's inexplicable, but a fact. The images of the processes are drawn with jeweler's precision, and they can only be seen under a microscope. The genetic disc is at least 6,000 years old, and it's unclear how such reliefs were created without the proper instruments. The strangely shaped human heads look different from typical images, and researchers are wondering what species these people belong to. Archaeological artifacts that don't fit into history raise many questions. It's already clear that our ancestors, the creators of this disc, possessed advanced knowledge, as evidenced by the microscopic engravings. The oldest mummies are not from Egypt. The mummification of bodies may have appeared in Europe several thousand years earlier than in ancient Egypt. Scientists from Uppsala University came to this conclusion after studying the remains of 13 people who died 8,000 years ago. According to a report published on the university's website, the mass burial was discovered in the 1960s in the Sado Valley in Portugal. In their new study, the specialists reanalyzed these remains and discovered that at least one person had been artificially mummified after death. As for the others, some bodies were buried in a position uncharacteristic for European practices, with their legs bent and pressed to their chest. Before burial, the bodies were dried, which, according to the scientists, indicates a natural mummification process. To preserve the integrity of the body, it was wrapped with rope or bandages. It is known that a similar practice was used in ancient Egypt. However, the oldest Egyptian mummies are about 4,000 years old, while the Portuguese ones are 8,000 years old. Thus, the discovered mummies may turn out to be the oldest in the world. Bad news for believers. The Shroud of Turin is a linen cloth with the image of a human body and face. The earliest reliable references date back to the mid-14th century. The cloth was associated with the knight Geoffroy de Charny and exhibitions in Lirey, Champagne. Even in that era, there was skepticism about it. The Bishop of Troyes called the image man-made. In 1988 and 1989, linen samples were sent to 3 independent laboratories, Arizona, Oxford, and Zurich, for radiocarbon analysis. The resulting range was 1260 to 1390, which is the same period when the shroud appears in historical sources. Popular objections were considered separately, such as the theory of a patch made from later fabric, contamination after the fire of 1532, the influence of carbon monoxide, and so on. The examinations did not provide convincing grounds to change the dating. Recently, another 14th century text was introduced into academic circulation. The French scholar Nicole Oram, in his treatise on unusual phenomena, mentions the shroud from Lirey as an example of a forgery, and he suggests evaluating such cases using standard criteria, independence of witnesses, and agreement of the description with natural causes. This shows that a skeptical position already existed during the first exhibitions. So, what we have is this. The sources and laboratory data indicate a medieval origin of the cloth in the image. This does not negate the cultural and religious significance of the object for believers. But within the framework of fact-checking, the conclusion is simple. Based on dating and documents, the shroud is a product of the Middle Ages, and it is definitely not 2,000 years old. The oldest name of God in a pile of garbage. Archaeologists working on the west bank of the Jordan River reported that they discovered a tiny curse tablet. The tablet is just a bit larger than a postage stamp. It bears an inscription in an early form of Hebrew, which calls upon God to curse a person who broke their word. Now, archaeologists from his group claim that the tablet is at least 3,200 years old. This makes the inscription the earliest known ancient Hebrew text and the first to contain the Hebrew name of God. However, a number of archaeologists who were not involved in the project say they cannot assess the find until details about it are published in a scientific journal, and at least one expert warns that the tablet may not be as ancient as its discoverers claim. The tablet was found in archaeological debris on Mount Ebal, north of the city of Nablus, in December 2019. The formation of this debris is a separate story. In the 1980s, Israeli archaeologist Adam Zertel excavated a complex of structures on Mount Ebal, which, based on several features, was identified as a Jewish cultic site. 40 proto-alphabetic symbols, inscribed in an early form of Hebrew or Canaanite language, on the outer and inner surfaces of the tablet, either warn about what will happen if someone does not fulfill their covenant obligations, or are already delivering punishment. In other words, this is a cheat sheet for the direct execution of the curse, which according to the Bible was pronounced precisely from Mount Ebal. Let me remind you, the blessings were given from nearby Mount Gerizim. The inscription uses the three-letter form of the Hebrew name of God, which roughly corresponds to the Russian letters Y, KH, and V. In other words, it refers to the name Yahweh. The mysterious disappearance of the ancient Chinese civilization. More than 5,000 years ago, an ancient civilization emerged on the banks of the Yangtze River in what is now eastern China, which later became advanced and magnificent. However, after some time, the people disappeared due to a climate apocalypse. Historians have discovered signs of the Liangzhu culture in the eastern territories of the country, which indicate the existence of a unique civilization. In particular, these people developed agriculture and aquaculture. The Liangzhu people also meticulously planned the architecture of their settlements. Even back then, they knew how to build reservoirs, dams, and many other water systems. About 1,000 years later, the civilization suddenly collapsed. Archaeologists still haven't fully discovered why this ancient people disappeared. According to the expert, monsoon rains may have also contributed to the disappearance of Liangzhu by flooding the people's territory and destroying the dams. However, another group of researchers believes that the reason for the civilization's extinction was the desert. The magic of words about the future. Do you hear the difference? Tomorrow it is raining and tomorrow it will rain? In the first version, the future sounds like part of the current picture. In the second, as something that will happen later. English more often chooses the second. It will rain tomorrow? German in conversation often uses the first. Morgen regne es. In Chinese, there is no separate future tense. It's indicated by words, markers, and context. A small detail of grammar suddenly becomes a convenient lens. In some languages, tomorrow stands next to today. In others, it's pushed away. Why know this if you're not a linguist? There are observations that behavioral economists like. Speakers of languages with a soft future tend to act more with the future in mind. Saving, insurance, regular checkups, education, not because there's some magic formula in your head, but because it's easier for the brain to make decisions. I'm doing something now for tomorrow. When the word for tomorrow sounds close in the language, it's not strict causality. Culture, income, family, and politics matter just as much, but the connection is noticeable and useful in everyday life. How can you use this? Tailor your speech to the task at hand. Not, I'll start saving someday, but in October I set aside 10%. Not, I should go running, but on Wednesday evening, I run 3 kilometers. Not, I'll start learning the language after the holiday, but on Sunday at 6, I do a lesson. Where the language doesn't put a wall between today and tomorrow, habits stick more easily. And this is one of those rare cases when changing the wording really changes the action from a vague later to a specific step in the calendar. Scientists still don't fully agree on which comes first, language or habit. Some studies find language has a clear effect even after accounting for income and values, while others see it as reflecting those factors. The practical takeaway is simple. Formulation helps you take action. If you say in October, I'll save 10%, the step becomes real. The mummy of the boy Pharaoh Tuta. There are many questions and oddities associated with the mummy of Tutankhamun. For example, the cause of the ruler's death has sparked a lot of debate. Some believe that the pharaoh was struck on the head with a blunt object, but it was later discovered that the skull injuries occurred after his death. Genetic analysis showed that Tutankhamun was bitten by a malaria-carrying mosquito, so scientists began to support the theory that he died from malaria. In the tomb with the pharaoh, the mummies of 2 female embryos were found. Who they are is unknown, but there is a theory that the girls were Tutankhamun's daughters, possibly twins. They were either born prematurely or were specifically removed from their mother's womb. Mom is more important than food. In the 1950s and 1960s, psychologist Harry Harlow placed baby rhesus macaques in cages with 2 mothers. One was made of bare wire, but had a bottle of milk, while the other was soft, covered with cloth, but had no food. It would seem the choice is obvious. Where there is food, there is love. But the babies spent almost all their time with the soft mother, and only went to the wire one to eat, immediately returning to the cloth. So the basic need is not just calories, but also contact, warmth, and support. Next came fear tests. A frightening object was placed in the cage. The baby would first cling to the soft mother, and then once calm, would start exploring the room. This is very similar to how a child behaves. First the base, then curiosity. When the soft mother was absent, the babies would freeze, squeal, hide in the corner, and hardly explore the space. The harshest part of this story is the long-term consequences of being deprived of contact. Monkeys that grew up without a real mother and without playing with peers became withdrawn, had poor social skills, and their parental behavior was disrupted. Later, it turned out that some of the problems could be alleviated if these babies were given a lot of live contact and care, but the traces of lacking warmth in early childhood still remained. The experiment influenced the approach to orphanages, maternity hospitals, and neonatal intensive care units. Physical contact is not a luxury, but a necessity. That's where the kangaroo method in neonatology comes from, as well as mother and child staying together and the focus on tactile support. After Harlow, scientific ethics became much stricter regarding experiments on animals. The price of knowledge should not break a living being unless absolutely necessary. The oldest depiction of a honey gatherer. Archaeologists discovered a rare rock painting depicting honey gathering in the vicinity of the Pyrenees in northeastern Spain. The drawing is done in the so-called Eastern Iberian or Levantine style, which is characterized by careful attention to small details. The image is remarkably well preserved. The ancient artist depicted a person climbing a ladder to get honey from a beehive. Some features of the drawing suggest that the artist created it about 7,500 years ago. There are 3 different compositions on the wall, which is more than 12 meters wide. Along with the honey gathering scene, the artist decorated the cave with an image of a pair of archers hunting and a running doe whose head is turned backward. Honey gathering scenes have been found before in the Levant region, which is known for its rock paintings. The most famous of them is known as the Bee Corp Man in Cuevas de la Reina, near Valencia. This composition is over 8,000 years old, and it is the oldest surviving depiction in this area. While other peoples of Europe at that time were engaged in agriculture, the hunter-gatherers of eastern Spain had to rely on beekeeping. They were willing to pay the highest price for it, a human life. The finds had to be buried back. A Danish amateur archaeologist named Søren Bagge made a rather interesting discovery. Luck struck the seeker very close to his home, near the small village of Lille-Carleby. Previously, the man had already found silver Arab coins in this place. This time, Søren came across an unusual signal. After digging, the treasure hunter pulled a silver bowl out of the ground, and under the bowl, he noticed something else. Continuing to dig, the man saw ancient jewelry deeper down. Like all law-abiding Danes, Søren Bagge decided to report his find to the archaeologist at the Roskilde City Museum. But there was a problem. It happened on a weekend. There were no staff at the museum, and the man, without thinking too long, decided to bury the items he found until the work week began. Then Søren Bagge reported the find to the archaeologists at the Roskilde City Museum. When the specialists finally arrived at the site, they determined that the ground contained a 10th century hoard, and the items in the hoard belonged to the Viking Age. The scientists concluded that in order to preserve the finds from possible damage, it would be advisable to cut out a section of earth containing the discovered items and transport everything to the laboratory for study. The find turned out to be quite impressive and included 392 items. among which were 2 silver bowls, 53 pendants made of silver and bronze, beads made of amber, silver, rock crystal, and glass totaling more than 300 pieces, a bracelet, a silver chain, as well as 18 European and Arab coins. The scientists determined that the hoard was buried in the second half of the 10th century, and the discovered jewelry was made in Eastern Europe, Ireland, Scandinavia, and Scotland. The discovered hoard is displayed at the National Museum in Roskilde. The Olmec heads in Mexico. The Olmecs were an advanced early Mesoamerican civilization that had a great influence on later cultures, such as the Aztecs and the Maya. The Olmec culture flourished in the coastal region of present-day Mexico from 200 to 400 before Common Era. The Olmecs were extremely talented artists and sculptors. Many statues, stelae, masks, figurines, and so on have remained from this civilization. The most famous creations of the Olmecs are the giant stone heads. There are at least 17 monumental stone sculptures in the shape of human heads, which are carved from large basalt boulders. The age of the stone heads is dated to at least the 9th century before Christ. There is currently much debate in scientific circles regarding the origin of these sculptures, considering the clearly African features of their faces. The power of authority. A man in a white coat calmly says, "Continue." Behind the wall, the student complains about his heart and screams. In front of you is a control panel with a switch from 15 to 450 volts and a table of mistakes. You are the teacher. A mistake means punishment, and each subsequent mistake means a higher voltage. This is what Stanley Milgram's experiment looked like at Yale in the early 1960s. The volunteer thought it was a memory study, but in reality the student was an actor, and the screams were pre-recorded. The goal was to see how far an ordinary person would go if there was an authority figure nearby confidently asking them to continue. The experiment requires you to continue. On the voltage scale, there were harsh labels like danger and 3 X's. At around 330 volts, the student would fall silent, as if he had lost consciousness. The results shocked everyone who believed that an ordinary person would never do such a thing. About 2/3 of the participants reached the maximum, 450 volts. Almost everyone experienced stress. Their hands were shaking, participants were sweating, laughing nervously, arguing with the experimenter, and still pressed the button. They weren't sadists. They did it because a confident scientist was standing nearby, taking responsibility. The important thing is that, in fact, no one was actually shocked. After the experiments, participants were told the truth and the purpose explained. However, this study became a reason to rethink the ethics of psychological research. Today, deception and pressure are strictly limited, and every project goes through an ethics committee. Repeated tests have shown the main thing. It's not about bad people, but about the circumstances. The farther away the victim is, the higher the authority's status, and the more formal the setting, the higher the obedience. If colleagues who refuse to continue appear nearby, obedience drops. Reduce the distance, remove symbols of authority, give a person support, and it becomes easier for them to say no. This experiment doesn't answer all the questions about good and evil, but it honestly shows that an ordinary person is capable of going very far if there's a confident continue nearby. And it also honestly shows how simple changes in the environment can restore a person's will to stop. The boundary runs not only within us, but also in the context in which we are placed. An ancient leather shoe. On one of the mountain passes during the exploration of the Hestfoni ice patch, archaeologists from Norway discovered many artifacts, including an ancient leather shoe. Researchers have determined that there are many factors at the site indicating the presence of horses. It is believed that ancient local herders used this pass during seasonal migrations. This is also confirmed by 3 ancient trails found by archaeologists. Surprisingly, the paths of the ancestors are marked with stone markers. Several horseshoes were also found in the research area, one of which turned out to be about 700 years old, as well as an ancient leather shoe dating back to approximately the 3rd or 4th century AD. Scientists also discovered the remains of a stone shelter, tools for hunting deer, as well as parts of a bow and arrows. It is noted that all the findings were recorded gradually as the glaciers melted. Who knows what secrets the ice blocks are hiding? Paleonori. In the 2000s, Brazilian geologists began to discover strange caves, Most of them were long arched tunnels with perfectly smooth floors, merging into complex underground networks of chambers and passages. All the evidence indicated that these caves were not created by any natural geological process. But what created entire networks of such huge tunnels and caves where a person can walk upright? The answer was suggested by deep grooves found on the ceilings and walls, which upon closer examination turned out to be ancient claw marks. But what really makes all this strange is the scale of the so-called paleo burrows. They are enormous, even for extinct giant sloths or armadillos, which are considered the most likely creators of these structures. The largest burrow was discovered in the state of Rondonia. Its total passage length is 610 meters, with tunnels that are 1 meter 80 centimeters high and 1.5 meters wide. To create just this one burrow, it was necessary to dig out 4,000 cubic meters of rock. There is no explanation whatsoever as to why the animals needed such complex shelters, or why there are no similar burrows in North America, even though giant sloths and armadillos also lived there thousands of years ago. Chang Heng's seismoscope. The year is 132 AD China, Eastern Han Dynasty. The scholar Zhang Heng presents a large bronze vessel to the courtiers. Around it are 8 dragon heads pointing to the cardinal directions, and under each one is a frog with an open mouth. Inside is a simple yet clever mechanism. When a distant earthquake happens, the tremor gently shifts the internal pendulum, pressing the correct lever so a ball drops from the matching dragon into the frog. The ball's sound signals the direction of the tremor, not its strength or duration, just the direction. This device mainly provides early warnings. The capital may not feel any shaking, but the ball would have already dropped. The chronicles describe a characteristic episode. The device was triggered even though the city was calm. A few days later, a message arrived from the western province about a serious earthquake. For managing the empire, this was useful, to know where to look for destruction, where to send help, and whom to summon for a report. An earthquake is elastic waves in the ground and in the air. Even if you don't feel them, the sensitive pendulum inside the vessel oscillates. The rest is a matter of technique. A small displacement is converted into the movement of a lever. The latch releases a ball, and we get an unambiguous direction indicator. Essentially, this is a signaling device, not a recording instrument. But for the 2nd century, it's a huge step. A natural phenomenon was translated into the language of simple mechanical actions. Modern reconstructions show that the idea is viable. By making the pendulum a bit shorter or heavier, you change its sensitivity. The arrangement of the levers sets 8 directions. In reality, they could have used more sectors, but 8 were enough to understand where to look on the map. The wealth of the ancient elite. In the city of Larnaca on Cyprus, there is Hala Sultan Teka, a place where, it is said, the aunt of the Prophet Muhammad, Haram, passed away. But this city has another unique history that began 3,300 years before us. In ancient times, this small city was a picturesque trading post that managed the world-famous copper reserves. Because of its success in copper mining, the city attracted much of the elite of that era, as confirmed by the recent discovery of royal tombs. These tombs turned out to be a storehouse of historical treasures, containing more than 500 high-quality burial items. Thanks to the diligence of local farmers who stumbled upon fragments of ancient pottery, archaeologists discovered these amazing finds using modern ground scanning equipment. Inside these tombs, deep underground, researchers discovered an astonishing collection of items adorned with gold, precious stones, and ivory. Among the finds were some remarkable ones: the remains of a woman with painted ceramic vessels and a bronze mirror, and next to her, a 1-year-old child with a ceramic toy. Analysis showed that the gold and ivory came from Egypt, while the blue lapis lazuli and turquoise came from Afghanistan, India, and Sinai. The ceramics were brought from Greece, Turkey, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. It's not surprising that the elite of that time could afford such luxury, since the copper they mined and sold to neighboring cultures was a vital resource, as bronze was made from it and tin. The Lost Labyrinth. If you were to build all the Greek buildings, it would take much less effort and expense than this labyrinth. Even the pharaoh's pyramids are much more majestic than ancient Greek works, but the Lost Labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. This is what the ancient Greek historian Herodotus believed in the 5th century before Christ. He described a colossal temple consisting of 3,000 rooms filled with paintings, engravings, and inscriptions. The ancient Greeks called it a labyrinth in honor of the intricate maze built by Daedalus for the Cretan king Minos, where the mythical Minotaur lived. Nowadays, nothing remains of the temple structures described by Herodotus. Perhaps they are preserved somewhere beneath the ground. Historians often question the words of Herodotus, but there are other ancient descriptions of this temple, so such a monumental structure could indeed have existed in the past. An expedition led by Makata was organized to search for the mysterious labyrinth. Archaeologists use the most advanced technologies to unravel the mystery of history. There is hope that someday this labyrinth will be found. Dozens of mysterious giant jars. At 4 sites in the Indian state of Assam, archaeologists found 65 giant stone jars of various sizes and shapes. The purpose of the vessels is unknown, but scientists say they may have been used in ancient burial rituals. Similar jars have been known in Assam since 1929, and there are 797 of them. The current discoveries were made when an archaeological expedition set out to study 3 already known but still undescribed stone jars, and at the same time examined the surrounding area. The jars are made of sandstone. Although archaeologists have not yet dated the finds, they note that similar jars discovered in this region date back to 401 before Christ or earlier. Some of the stone vessels reach 3 meters in height and 2 meters in diameter. Similar artifacts have previously been found by scientists in Indonesia and Laos. The most famous is the Laotian Plain of Jars in Chiangkuang province. Research in the valley began in the 1930s. At that time, scientists discovered evidence of cremation inside the stone vessels in the form of burned teeth and bone fragments. Therefore, they concluded that the vessels were used as burial urns. There was also a theory that the vessels were used for the primary burial of bodies, and when the flesh decomposed, the bones were buried in the ground. In 2016, scientists determined that some of the burials in the Plain of Jars were made about 2,500 years ago, while in the Assamese jars, no human remains or other contents have been found so far. The Naga people who live in Assam have a legend that similar stone vessels used to be found with cremated remains, beads, and other material artifacts inside. Researchers suspect that the stone jar traditions in Assam and Laos are connected. Eternal memory in glass. Imagine a thin plate made of quartz glass. A laser creates tiny marks inside it like dots, but in 3 dimensions. These marks can be rotated and made stronger or weaker, so a lot of information can fit into a single plate. Basically, it's not just one flat track like on a disc, but a whole multi-layered archive inside the glass. The main feature is durability. Glass doesn't rust, isn't afraid of water, magnets, or time. Calculations and tests show that this kind of storage can withstand heat, humidity, and last an incredibly long time. This isn't just a flash drive, but a permanent cold archive. You write to it and leave it untouched for years or even millennia. Basically, it's simple. A laser records information inside. When reading, the glass is illuminated. A camera captures the pattern of marks, and software restores the original files. This works not only for documents, videos are also stored on the glass and can be read back. The main benefit is hassle-free storage. The plate can sit on a shelf for years, and you can read it at any moment. It's convenient for family archives, film libraries, and time capsules. Chandarskaya plate. Unique artifacts appear quite often, but they are not always known to the general public. One of the latest sensations that surprised all scientists was a huge stone slab found in Bashkiria, which was named the Chandarskaya plate. Its surface features a relief map of the area. There are no images of modern roads on it, but instead there are strange platforms carved into it, which were later identified as airfields. The age of the 1-ton monolith was so astonishing that the discovery was declared a gift from aliens who wanted to settle on our planet. In any case, scientists have not provided a clear explanation as to how the relief outlines of a map of the area appeared on a boulder estimated to be 50 million years old. Giant camels lived alongside humans. An international team of scientists has concluded that our distant ancestors probably encountered extinct giant 2-humped camels that lived alongside them in Mongolia about 26,500 years ago. Camelus noblochi is an extinct two-humped camel that lived during the Pleistocene and was also one of the largest species of these animals. It reached 3 meters in height and weighed about a ton. At its peak, its range stretched from Eastern Europe to Transbaikalia. As is known, camels contributed to the expansion of the human population into arid regions, and one such helper for humans was probably Camelus noblochi, not in terms of domestication, but as a source of food. One of the reasons for its extinction is believed to be competition with Camelus ferus, a species of wild camel that still inhabits Mongolia. However, today, it is threatened with extinction. Another reason for the extinction of the giant two-humped camels is climate change, but perhaps hunting by ancient humans also played a role in this. Evidence of the coexistence of camels and humans has been recorded in ancient petroglyphs, including in Mongolia itself. An article by an international team of scientists shows that Camelus knoblauchi lived alongside anatomically modern humans. This is evidenced by marks on the camel's bones. However, the researchers are not sure whether people caught the animal while hunting. It is possible that they were butchering a carcass. The mysterious ocean monster. In cold and temperate seas lives a creature that's hard to imagine just by looking at it, the lion's mane jellyfish. It's a huge reddish dome with a cascade of thin threads. Measurements from different years show a similar picture. In large individuals, the tentacles reach up to 30 to 37 meters, and the mass of some giants is estimated at up to 1 ton. The threads are gathered into 8 fans, and each contains hundreds of stinging filaments. Such a curtain works as a trap for fish and other jellyfish. For humans, this poses a risk of painful burns, even if the bell is far away. The name was not chosen by accident. The bundles of tentacles really do resemble a thick mane around the bell. They don't just scare, they work like nets. The jellyfish captures plankton and small fish and sometimes other jellyfish. When the water temperature is favorable and food is abundant, such creatures appear more often near the shore. After contact, a person's skin is covered with burn marks, and although fatal cases are rare, the experience is unforgettable. The title of the largest jellyfish remains a subject of debate. Some refer to a giant specimen from the 19th century off the coast of New England. Others doubt the accuracy of the measurements and remind us about the Nomura's jellyfish from the Yellow and East China Seas. Nomura's jellyfish can reach about 2 meters in diameter and weigh hundreds of kilograms. During mass invasions, they clog the catch. There's no fish in the nets, only solid jellyfish. On the other end of the spectrum are the tiny Irukandji, with a bell just a few centimeters across, but their toxin, in an unlucky encounter, can send an adult to intensive care. The lion's mane jellyfish is not a mythical monster, but a part of the ocean's great mechanism. Leatherback turtles and large fish eat it, and it helps regulate the numbers of fry and plankton. The risk of encounters increases in warm years during mass algal blooms. During such times, it's better to pay attention to Coast Guard warnings and avoid diving without a wetsuit. A medieval amulet with a magical inscription. A valuable artifact was found in Wiltshire County, United Kingdom, with the help of a metal detector. The name of the person who found the medieval gold brooch with inscriptions in Latin and Hebrew is not being disclosed. According to experts, this 800-year-old brooch most likely served as an amulet, and it intertwined both the religious and magical beliefs of medieval society at the same time. The inscription in Latin translates as "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Amen." And the inscription in Hebrew is the abbreviation "You are mighty forever, Lord," which means "You are mighty forever, Lord." According to Professor of Religious Studies at Northwestern University, Richard Kiefer, the phrase "You are mighty forever, Lord" in Hebrew was often used in medieval magical artifacts, whereas the prayer was a standard hymn to the Virgin Mary, common among all Christians. The expert emphasized that such a mixture of religious and magical meanings gave the amulet special power in the eyes of the person who wore it. The Jewish abbreviation Agla was very often used in the Middle Ages, from high ritual magic to protective amulets and charms. This is one of many divine names or words of power common in medieval traditions. Given the small size of the brooch and the mention of the Virgin Mary, this item could have belonged to a woman. Perhaps the brooch was worn as a means of protection during pregnancy or childbirth. Now, according to British law, the find is subject to the Treasure Act. It will determine the further fate of the artifact. It may be transferred to one of the local museums, and the person who found it will receive a monetary reward. Dvaraka. Hindus consider Dvaraka a sacred city. They believe that it was the beloved home of the god Krishna, who lived on earth 5,000 years ago. Dvaraka was built by an architect at Krishna's command. The materials used for the construction were crystal, emeralds, and silver. For each of the 16,108 queens, more than 100 palaces were erected. Dvaraka was destroyed during the battle between Krishna and King Salva. Salva bombed the city with a beam of energy. Of course, all these events hardly resemble the truth, but scientists still wanted to find the mythical city. Researchers diving underwater discovered ancient ruins at its supposed location. In front of them lay a large ancient city, the layout of which matched the description, only without the crystal palaces. It is believed that the real Dvaraka was built 9,000 years ago. It can be considered the oldest city on Earth. It disappeared underwater in the 2nd millennium before Christ. The return of the brain to life. In 2019, a team from Delski University obtained pig brains immediately after slaughter. 4 hours passed, then the samples were connected to a closed system. Pumps slowly circulated a warm solution with oxygen and protective components through the vessels. The task was simple in wording, but complex in essence: to sustain tissue that had already crossed the boundaries of our usual understanding after death. After a few hours, the vessels began to allow the flow of solution again, the cells restored their metabolic functions, neurons held an electrical charge and responded to local stimuli. This is not resurrection. There was no organized brain activity. It was further suppressed with medication. The researchers did not cross the ethical line and did not attempt to induce consciousness. The main conclusion is clear even to a child. Death is not a single snap, but a sequence of different stages. Individual functions fade one after another, and some of them turn out to be reversible if the tissue structure is not destroyed. That's why in cryobiology, it's not about freezing at any cost, but about preserving the structure of connections without ice and ruptures. The more carefully the tissue is preserved, the higher the chance to restore basic processes later. The experiment shows that the process of dying is stretched out over time, and cells have a short window when they still hold on and respond to stimuli. If you prevent ice crystals from destroying the membranes and support the environment, functions gradually return. That's why the main priority is preserving the tissue now, so that later there's actually something to revive. A broken nose on ancient statues. The most common question asked by visitors to Egyptian halls and museums around the world is why the statues have broken noses. It may seem inevitable that after thousands of years, an ancient artifact would show signs of damage, but careful observation reveals a widespread pattern of deliberate destruction. Because as it turns out, there is a complex set of reasons why most works of Egyptian art have been damaged. There were many political, religious, personal, and criminal motives for acts of vandalism, so the distinction between accidental damage and deliberate vandalism is quite clear. It's important to note that the ancient Egyptians attributed significant features to images of the human form. They believed that the essence of a deity could reside in the image of that deity. Or in the case of ordinary mortals, part of the essence of the deceased person could reside in the statue depicting them. A damaged body part can no longer perform its function. Without a nose, the spirit of the statue stops breathing, so this effectively kills it. In the era of the pharaohs, there was a clear understanding of what a sculpture was supposed to do. Even if a petty tomb robber was mainly interested in stealing valuable items, he was also concerned that the deceased might take revenge if their image was not mutilated, not killed. The destruction of noses on statues on a large scale was primarily political. Defacing statues helped ambitious rulers rewrite history in their favor. The deliberate precision of the chisels suggests that the Vandals were skilled workers, trained and hired specifically for this purpose. The understanding of statues and reliefs changed over time as cultural norms evolved. In the early Christian period in Egypt, between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD, the local gods inhabiting the sculptures were feared as pagan demons. Statues were attacked, their noses and mouths were broken off to neutralize them. Yes, the religion was new, but the fears and methods of combating them were old. The Great Sphinx of Giza is a symbol of these fears and the demonstration of these methods. The successors of the Christians, the Muslims, disfigured its face by removing its nose. Infants were buried in helmets made from human skulls. Another archaeological horror. During excavations in Ecuador, archaeologists discovered the skeletons of 2 infants buried in helmets made from the skulls of other children. The Salango ritual complex on the coast of Ecuador, dating to around the 1st century before Christ, was a burial site for the Guangala culture. Among the 11 skeletons, there were 2 infants whose skulls were covered with the skulls of other children, so that the face of the buried child looked out through an opening in the skull. One infant was 18 months old at the time of death, and the skull of a child aged 4 to 12 years was placed over him. On the head of the second baby, who was 6 to 9 months old, was the skull of a child aged 2 to 12 years. The helmet's age wasn't precisely determined due to missing teeth, the best indicator. This is a rare find. Archaeologists have never encountered anything like it before. The ritual seems strange, even in the context of ancient Han cultures, where manipulations with heads were common. Perhaps the burial was an attempt to somehow protect these prematurely departed children's souls. Scientists hope that genetic and isotopic analyses will help determine how the children, all 4 of them, were related to each other. So far, researchers have found signs of severe anemia on the bones of both infants as well as on the helmet skulls. An interesting detail is that volcanic ash was found in the layers preceding the burial. Could the illnesses and deaths of the children be related to the aftermath of this eruption? A vaccine against fear? For a long time, people believed that life could arise spontaneously. If bread became moldy, it meant the mold appeared on its own. If meat rotted, it meant worms were born. It seemed logical, since no one could see how invisible creatures got in there. Pasteur conducted a simple and clear experiment. He took flasks with nutrient broth, boiled them, and killed all living things inside. He stretched and bent the neck of each flask into the shape of a long swan's neck. Air could freely enter, but dust with microbes settled in the bends and didn't reach the broth. As a result, the broth remained clear and clean for weeks and months. But if the flask was tilted so that the broth touched the dust in the bend, or if the neck was broken off, the liquid quickly became cloudy. This means that life does not arise from nothing. It is brought in by air along with dust. From this came the simple practices we still use today. Boiling, sterile instruments, sealed jars, and clean operating rooms are direct descendants of those flasks. Pasteurization of milk follows the same logic. Heat it to kill the microbes and block the way for new guests to enter. A few years later, Pasteur went even further, moving from cleanliness to protection. He was looking for a way to tame disease. For anthrax, chicken cholera, and most importantly rabies, he managed to weaken the pathogen and administered a series of vaccinations so that the immune system could learn to fight in advance. The story with rabies became a symbol. In 1885 in Paris, a 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister, who had been badly bitten by a rabid dog, was brought to him. At that time, it almost always ended in a painful death. Pasteur took the risk and administered a course of vaccinations using his own, not yet approved, method. The boy survived. For thousands of people, it sounded like a vaccine against fear. For the first time, a deadly disease had a real shield. The whole point of this story is its clarity. A couple of flasks showed us where infection comes from, a few careful steps, and you have in your hands a tool that saves food, operating rooms, and people. No magic, just cleanliness, warmth, and an understanding of how the invisible world really works. A 12,000-year-old mammoth tooth. A group of fishermen from New Hampshire caught a woolly mammoth tooth while fishing for sea scallops off the coast of Massachusetts. This was reported by the United Press International News Agency. The crew of a fishing boat in New Hampshire was catching sea scallops when they pulled up something unexpected. A 12,000-year-old woolly mammoth tooth, 11 inches long. Tim Ryder, the captain and co-owner of New England Fishmongers, took the 7-pound object to the University of New Hampshire, where experts examined it thoroughly. Ryder decided to put the tooth up for auction on eBay and donate the proceeds to charity. The first navigational maps in the world. We are all used to having modern maps always at hand, literally. We also remember paper maps that we used before everyone had smartphones. And of course, in movies, we've seen what ancient paper maps look like. But the first map appeared long before paper was invented, and the idea of the world was completely different from what we're used to. The oldest navigational map, the mystery of which scientists still cannot solve. This discovery was made at the end of the 19th century during the excavations in ancient Mesopotamia. Several thousand clay tablets were found, and this discovery became a sensation. They were preserved well enough for scientists to study the inscriptions on them, even though they date back to the 6th century before Christ. The tablets contain a huge amount of information important for history, and this discovery allowed scientists to fill in the gaps in the history of the ancient world. At that time, Babylon was at the peak of its prosperity, so such discoveries are extremely valuable for historians. But among all the tablets, scientists singled out only one. It depicts a map of the ancient world. Many scientists who worked on deciphering it have explained what exactly was written on the tablet. The uniqueness of the discovered map is that it shows the entire territory known to ancient people, not just a local area. We can look at how ancient people imagined the world and which places they knew. The map drawing is a circle that represents the earth, and around it are waters. Small circles probably depict cities, and triangles represent mountains. The map also has place names, which of course are different from the ones we know. For example, the world ocean here is called the Bitter Waters, and the place referred to as a swamp is most likely the mouth of the Shat al-Arab River. The ancient people who created this map believed that the earth consisted of 4 endless shores of land. Of course, there were inaccuracies in the map, but the very fact that a world map appeared long before our era is astonishing. By the way, the map actually says that it is a copy of an even older map, which dates back to the 9th century before Christ. The reverse side of the tablet raises many questions, the answers to which scientists have not yet found. On this side, all the animals known to ancient people are listed, but only 2 species of them lived in this area. Also, on this side, the myth is told about how Marduk, the chief god, cast all the others down into the underworld. It also describes the reign of King Sargon I. This map has become a cultural heritage of the whole world, and its contribution to the restoration of ancient history is hard to overestimate. All the clay tablets are still being studied by scholars who are trying to decipher their meaning and fully translate the inscriptions. Skeletons in unusual graves? In the Negev desert in southern Israel, archaeologists discovered a burial site that's about 2,500 years old. Can you imagine? Inside, there are as many as 50 skeletons, which, according to researchers, may belong to women who were sold into slavery. The most interesting thing about these finds is the shape of the tombs. While we're used to seeing round-shaped burials in the Negev desert, these 2 tombs are unique and have square dimensions. Plus, they are located in a very unusual place, at the intersection of 2 trade routes that once connected Egypt, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. Scientists note that such burials at crossroads are not as surprising as they might seem. After all, people who died in the harsh desert conditions from illness or violence were often buried right where they died. However, in ancient times, such crossroads were considered sacred places with ritual and religious significance. Now let's get to the main point. During the excavations, many artifacts were discovered dating back to approximately the 7th to 5th centuries before Christ. All of them were produced in different places: southern Lebanon, the southern Arabian Peninsula, and of course, Egypt. This, along with the jewelry and amulets found in the tombs, confirms the assumption that women who were sold into slavery and transported from Egypt are buried here. But this still needs to be confirmed. The first eco-girl. Summer of 1978, England. In an ordinary hospital in the city of Altham, a girl named Louisa Braun is born. She looks like an ordinary baby, weighing 2.6 kilograms, healthy and crying loudly. What was unusual was the way she appeared. The egg was fertilized in a laboratory dish, not in the mother's body. The embryo was then placed in the womb, and the pregnancy continued normally. Leslie and John Braun had previously spent years unsuccessfully trying to have a child. Doctors Robert Edwards and Patrick Steptoe offered them a method that was considered a crazy hope: to take an egg cell, combine it with a sperm cell in a sterile environment, and transfer the embryo back. It sounds simple, but at that time every detail was on the edge, from the exact timing of egg retrieval to the conditions in the incubator. Any mistake, and nothing would work out. There was a lot of skepticism. Newspapers wrote about test tube babies, and philosophers, religious leaders, and politicians argued about it. Some said we were meddling where we shouldn't. Others believed it was a chance for families who would otherwise never hear a child's cry in their home. After 9 months, all the arguments quieted down for a moment. Louisa was born healthy. Edwards later received the Nobel Prize. Steptoe didn't live to see it, but their work paved the way for millions of families. Then the technology developed very quickly. They learned to retrieve more eggs per cycle, to grow embryos better, to select the most viable ones, and to perform the transfer more carefully. Cryopreservation appeared. Now embryos can be vitrified and used later. For patients, this meant a simple, clear thing. If natural conception doesn't work, there is a real tool left, not just miracles and prayers. Today, in vitro fertilization is not a sensation, but a routine procedure in clinics around the world. Yes, it's expensive, and yes, it doesn't always work the first time. And yes, ethical discussions haven't disappeared, but the very fact is no longer disputed. A child conceived in a laboratory is no different from any other. The story of Louise Brown is the moment when the impossible became the ordinary, and when millions of couples got the chance to hear the voice of their long-awaited child. A way has been found to restore ancient sense. Modern people already know quite a lot about the lives of their ancestors in different periods, but until now, even the clearest images of ancient people's daily life have been missing a very important detail: the smells. We still don't know what scents and odors surrounded people in the past, but German scientists have suggested ways to fix this. Smell has always been an integral part of human life, but the scents of the past are still a mystery to modern people. The thing is, most scents are made up of organic substances that decompose quickly. That's why archaeologists can't determine what certain objects smelled like thousands of years ago. But now, researchers from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History have proposed methods that could help reconstruct the scents of the distant past. If scientists are able to reconstruct scents from the past, we will gain more information about the lives of our ancestors. How were rituals conducted, for example? What kinds of incense were used? Did they have perfumes? What did the kitchen smell like? Did ancient people follow hygiene rules? After all, researchers believe they can reconstruct the scents that prevailed in various situations in the past using certain scientific methods. In particular, metabolomics can help them, a science that studies the collection of small molecules in an organism, organ, tissue, or cell, which can reveal information about life processes in various organisms. Specialists can also use proteomics methods, a field of molecular biology dedicated to the identification and quantitative analysis of proteins. Combined with the study of ancient texts, images, and broader archaeological and environmental records, researchers will be able to discover previously unknown aspects of ancient human life, including what kinds of smells surrounded them. How the Maya made rubber. The Maya made rubber from two types of sap. They would take the white milky sap from a rubber tree, add a little green sap from a forest vine, mix it with a stick, and the liquid would thicken, darken, and become sticky right before their eyes. After a couple of minutes, what was once milky sap turned into a soft, elastic mass. They would knead it, roll it, dry it, and end up with a material that was springy and didn't fall apart. Why does this work in simple terms? The white sap is latex, which is made up of many tiny droplets of rubber and water. The vine sap changes the environment, and the droplets start sticking together, turning the mass into something solid and elastic. No ovens or sulfur are needed. Everything is done cold, using plant materials. They controlled the hardness by adjusting the proportions. If they needed it softer, they added less vine sap and kneaded it longer. If they wanted a strong ball, they added more sap and made it thicker when drying. The craftsmen literally adjusted the material for the task by hand, like dough. They made heavy bouncing balls for games, so they would rebound off the floor and walls, glue and sealant for vessels and boats, waterproofing for baskets and fabrics to prevent leaks, and grips for handles and sandals so they wouldn't slip and would last longer. The rubber was molded into ingots and taken for trade. It was a valuable commodity, and most importantly, all of this was just ordinary craftsmanship. Two types of sap, a stick for stirring, a bit of experience, and you had ready-made rubber in your hands, long before the vulcanization factories in Europe. A treasure chest on the beach. Cleaning up trash from the beach should be a reward in itself, but one cleaner walked away with a bonus by finding a real wooden treasure chest. In the chest found by Jenny Fitzgerald, there were about 100 old coins, gemstones, a rusty pocket watch, and a ring. She found the treasure between Card Gap and Happysburg when she was with a beach cleanup group in North Norfolk on March 20th. The 10-inch box was at the foot of a low cliff, hidden behind a sandbar. Mrs. Fitzgerald believes the chest was discovered as a result of a recent cliff fall. It was covered with sand, but is in fairly good condition considering its age. Her husband James helped her bring the 3-pound chest home to Norwich, where the Harrison children, 9-year-old and 6-year-old Dursey, helped clean off the sand using old toothbrushes. They also found an ornate perfume bottle, an iron key, and a silver match holder engraved with the name Ernest. The chest has been handed over to the Norfolk County Council and may be given to the coroner to determine who it belonged to. The finds liaison officer believes that this discovery has more historical value, but the Fitzgerald children think they will get rich. Day zero of the ancient computer. Researchers from University College London, led by mechanical engineer Tony Fritt, have suggested the date of day zero for the Antikythera mechanism. On December 23rd, 178 before Christ, a visible solar eclipse occurred, a rare event that held great significance for the priests of that period. In addition, the sun entered the constellation of Capricorn, and it was the day of the winter solstice. On these same dates, the religious festival of Isaiah was celebrated, which was associated with lunar and solar eclipses. The Antikythera mechanism is an ancient device that was used to track celestial bodies and astronomical events. Sponge divers discovered this mechanism in 1900 on an ancient sunken ship off the coast of the island of Antikythera in Greece. A year later, archaeologist Valerio Stice was studying what he thought was a piece of rock found after the shipwreck and noticed that a gear was embedded in it. It turned out to be an ancient mechanical device. Later, high-resolution X-ray tomography showed that it was an analog computer with 36 gears, of which 30 have survived. On its front surface, there were engravings showing the solar cycle and constellations, as well as indicators for the positions of the sun and the moon. Any measuring system, from a thermometer to the Antikythera mechanism, needs calibration in order to perform its calculations correctly. Of course, the ancient mechanism was hardly perfect. It's not a digital computer, but gears, but it allowed for very accurate predictions of solar and lunar eclipses. The first heart transplant. December 1967, Cape Town, Groot Schuur Hospital. Surgeon Christian Barnard is preparing for something no one has ever done before, a human heart transplant. The patient is 53-year-old Louise Vashkansky, suffering from severe heart failure. There is almost no chance. The donor is a young woman who died in an accident. The doctors confirm brain death, and the family gives consent for donation. The team enters the operating room and performs what looked like pure science, on the edge of what was possible. The donor's heart is cooled and transferred into the patient's chest. The vessels are sewn together, connected to the blood flow. The clamps are removed, and the heart that just a minute ago was lying on the table makes its first beat in the new body. This was the moment after which newspaper headlines around the world could never sound the same again. Vashkansky lived for 18 days. He did not die from heart failure, but from pneumonia. To prevent rejection, strong immunosuppressive drugs were given, and the body could not cope with the infection. A few months later, the second patient, Philip Lieberg, lived for a year and a half. For that time, it was a significant result. It became clear the operation itself was possible, and the main problem was controlling immunity and infection. From then on, everything depended on the details that determined life. Surgeons improved their technique, and pharmacologists came up with a new drug. In the early 1980s, cyclosporin appeared, and survival rates increased dramatically. Heart transplantation stopped being a single daring operation and became routine practice for thousands of people each year. Yes, the shortage of donors and the risk of rejection haven't gone anywhere, but the very idea of replacing the heart stopped being science fiction. This is a story about cost and about boundaries. Some debated if declaring death by brain criteria was acceptable and when organ removal was allowed. Barnard took a step that propelled medicine forward and gave new life to hundreds of thousands of people. Gold under the floor. A hoard of gold and silver coins from the late 15th century was discovered in the center of French Dijon. Archaeologists from the National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research were surveying a site near the Abbey of Saint-Benin when they found 34 ancient coins hidden in the ruins of one of the stone buildings. The house was built in the late 15th or early 16th century, and the coins were hidden under the floor of the old house. Of the 34 coins found, 10 turned out to be gold and 24 were silver. They were placed in a small bronze box, which survived only partially due to damage sustained during urban development in the 20th century. A gold pendant covered with green and white enamel was also found in the box. The coins had stuck together over time. Specialists from INRAP were able to separate and clean them in the laboratory, after which it was determined that all the coins date back to the second half of the 15th century. The oldest of the coins, the Brabant coin, is made of gold and was issued between 1432 and 1467. The newest one is also a gold coin of Pope Innocent VIII, issued between 1484 and 1492. Judging by their condition, it can be assumed that the coins were in circulation for a short time. The hoard contains only one French coin, issued by King Louis XI, and most of the coins are Italian, among which the silver testons stand out, issued in the Duchy of Milan during the reign of Galeazzo Maria Sforza. This find is of great numismatic interest, as only a few examples of such coins are known to exist. The hefty, high-quality coins undoubtedly demonstrate the power of authority and the desire to create a benchmark currency at that time. This hoard is also a valuable testament to the frequent visits to this region at the end of the 15th century and reflects the social sphere of the market and the European trading world of that time. The states where these coins were minted include regions that played an important role in European trade at that time. The bread of St. Francis. In Italy, the monks from the Apolloni monastery faced a harsh, hungry winter. According to a 700-year-old legend, one night an angel brought bread and left it on the doorstep of the monastery. The monks believed that the food was sent by St. Francis of Assisi, who was in France at the time. The monks even considered the sack in which the bread was delivered to be a holy relic, and they kept it for 7 centuries. Scientists decided to investigate the old legend and tested the preserved piece of the sack. It turned out that the age of the fabric dates back to around 1220 to 1295, which perfectly matches the year when the miracle happened, 1224. Then the scientists examined the inner surface of the textile and discovered ergosterol. This biomarker is usually found in mold associated with baking, brewing, and agriculture. Most likely, the medieval material came into contact with bread. This data, along with the age of the relic, confirms the myth. Heron's steam toy. Alexandria, 1st century AD. The inventor Heron demonstrates a device that looks like a trick, but in reality, it's pure physics. A copper sphere is mounted on an axle and hangs above a brazier. A tube runs down from the sphere to a vessel of water. 2 small pipes are fitted into the sphere, each bent in opposite directions. When the water beneath the sphere is heated, steam rises inside, bursts out of the nozzles, and the sphere begins to spin. This is jet propulsion in its simplest form. We're used to seeing steam engines in 19th century textbooks, but the principle was demonstrated here. In antiquity, heat water and you get motion. Heron's second invention is even more spectacular: automatic doors in the temple. Here's how it works. A fire is lit on the altar. There's a closed vessel with water under the altar. The fire heats the air in the chamber. The pressure rises and pushes the water through a tube into another vessel. That vessel gets heavier and through a system of pulleys and ropes pulls the doors open. The doors swing open by themselves. The priests put out the fire. The pressure drops. The water siphons back. The counterweight takes over and the doors smoothly close. There's no magic, just heat, pressure, and movement. Heron also made other devices like a coin-operated holy water dispenser and a water clock. He even made small scenes with figurines that moved according to a program. But it's the steam-powered sphere and the temple doors that best illustrate the idea. Complex science often starts with a very simple visual model that can be explained in a minute and demonstrated on a table. The Ithaca neural network is capable of reading ancient texts. Neural networks and machine learning are finding applications everywhere. It has become known that Alphabet's subsidiary, DeepMind, has developed an artificial intelligence capable of understanding and restoring text on ancient artifacts. It is also reported that the neural network, called Ithaca, is capable of determining the period when the text was written. As the developers of the neural network explained, the intelligence was trained on almost 80,000 examples of ancient Greek artifacts. In addition, each inscription is provided with metadata indicating when a particular record was made. Based on this input, Ithaca already forms its own ideas about the missing characters and the date. However, as the developers explained, the neural network does not guarantee 100% accuracy in reproducing the original text. For this reason, Ithaca is not an independent software for determining the history of a find. The neural network, roughly speaking, is advisory in nature. Ithaca will propose replacements for missing characters, but a human will still verify the result's correctness and logic. In the future, the developers plan to increase the localization of the neural network, as well as improve recognition accuracy by introducing a large number of text samples. The legendary Native American chief's great-great-grandson. Paleogeneticists in the United States extracted DNA from the scalp of Sitting Bull, a chief who lived in the 19th century, and confirmed that Ernie LaPointe, an American, is the great-great-grandson of one of the most famous Native Americans. According to one of the authors of the study, Professor S.K. Willerslev from the University of Cambridge, the scientists were able to extract a large enough amount of genetic material from Sitting Bull's hair and compare it with the genomes of modern representatives of the Sioux tribe. Sitting Bull was one of the iconic figures in the history of the resistance of Native Americans in the United States. He was one of the leaders of the Sioux Tribal Alliance in the early 1860s and inflicted a number of defeats on the regular army and volunteer units of the United States. Sitting Bull achieved his greatest victory in 1876 at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, defeating the army of General George Custer. Historians do not have exact information about the burial place of Sitting Bull, who was killed in 1890. The family ties of the chief with his descendants were also unknown. Despite the difficulties associated with extracting DNA from hair, scientists were able to decode 0.8% of the genome of the legendary Native American chief and confirm that Ernie LaPointe is indeed the great-grandson of Sitting Bull on his mother's side. Researchers hope to find other descendants of the chief in the future, as well as to precisely locate the whereabouts of his remains. Griffins from the pharmacy. And now let's travel to the depths of mystical St. Petersburg, where the walls of old houses are literally soaked with the spirit of the past. And our characters today are an incredibly intriguing Russian chemist and his griffins. Alexander Vasilievich Pell is a scientist, a brilliant chemist, a teacher, and the publisher of his own journal. He opened and owned one of the oldest pharmacies in Petersburg, invented a unique method for storing medicines in glass ampules, and even developed his own medications. However, it is his alchemical experiments that are at the center of our attention today. Imagine the famous chemist using his powerful scientific and technical resources not only works on solving important medical problems, but also searches for the philosopher's stone, or rather, as they say, he found it. But that's not all. In the courtyard of Pelya's pharmacy on Vasilievsky Island was his laboratory, where, according to city rumors, the chemist bred griffins. Yes, those very creatures from myths and legends. At night, they supposedly left their tower, now known as the Griffin Tower, and fluttered around the area, frightening the local residents. In the 90s, mysterious numbers began to appear on the tower, which mysticism enthusiasts immediately declared to be the formula for happiness, created by Pelya himself. In reality, it was an art project by a St. Petersburg artist. But these numbers continue to be updated to this day. So, history and mystery enthusiasts, if you are lucky enough to visit St. Petersburg, be sure to check out the museum located in this tower. Who knows? Maybe you'll be lucky and see the shadows of the griffins or their reflections in the windows of the neighboring buildings. Or maybe you'll even manage to decipher that very formula for happiness. Because as they say, until proven otherwise, griffins exist. Perhaps they're just waiting for their moment to give each of us our own piece of happiness. An artificial brain is playing tennis. In the laboratory, they grew a culture of neurons and connected it to the old game Pong. On the table, there's not a computer, but a flat matrix of electrodes with a carpet of living cells, about 800,000 human and mouse neurons. The electrodes on the right and left tell the network where the ball is, and how close it is to the paddle, while other electrodes receive the response, up or down. When the ball goes past, the network receives an unpleasant, chaotic signal. When it hits, a short, predictable stimulus comes in. This way, the neurons are given a simple goal: to reduce chaos and hit more often. After a few minutes, the culture outperforms a random player. It's not some miracle intelligence or a brain in a jar that understands the rules. The network simply learns to recognize repeating situations and give an appropriate response. There are a lot of mistakes, but there are noticeably more hits than with random movements. The practical point here is that this is a controlled setup. You can immediately see how a substance changes the behavior of the neurons. You give a drop, and by the number of hits, response time, and signal stability, it's clear whether things got better or worse. The same goes for toxins, alcohol and nicotine, and aesthetics. You don't have to guess the effect. It's displayed as a graph within minutes. The same setup is also suitable for fine-tuning prosthetics and neuro interfaces. Living tissue reacts to noise and delays differently than a computer model, and you can catch this in real time. This is not consciousness and not a brain in a jar. There are no feelings of self here. There is a layer of neurons on an electrode array that, when signaled, learns one trick: to move the paddle. The value is in control. You can make the rules more complex, add moves, change the reward, and measure the results every second. Accuracy, speed, stability. Next, it's not a pixel on the screen, but a real object. The same network moves a small motor or stabilizes an LED based on the signal. You can also grow the cells of a specific person and calmly see which medicines actually improve their function. All the stories from the episode can be verified. That's their strength. Write which discoveries you want me to cover next, and I'll make a new episode about things that change our understanding of what's possible. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.